from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. This is All Access Med School Admissions. Hello again, everybody. I'm Christian Nessman. I'm your host. And hey, thanks for joining me today. Before we dive into everything about Dell Med, I want to tell you that recently I was invited to be a guest on the Pre-Med Years podcast, which is hosted by Dr. Ryan Gray. If you haven't heard of the Pre-Med Years, it's a very well-established podcast. The guy has almost coming up on 400 episodes, all kinds of information and resources for pre-med students. He's got a great website with more resources and forums and stuff. So if you haven't heard about it, you got to check it out. So Dr. Gray and I had a really fun conversation about admissions and transparency in admissions, and he was helping me plug this podcast to help this get off the ground too. So I'm very grateful to him. So check it out, the Pre-Med Years. So today we're going to be talking, you hear the music, it sounds like kind of country-ish. I love music, and so I try to find some music to kind of go along sometimes with the theme of an episode. And so with the music that you're hearing right now, it sounds a little country. I'm taking it today down to the Lone Star State of Texas, where we're going to be talking to Mr. Joel Daboub from the University of Texas at Austin. And I met Joel, just about a little over a month ago, back in May of 2019 at a AMA conference, the American Medical Association conference. And him and I got to talking, and we hit it off, and I learned about Dell, and I thought, I got to get this guy on the podcast. So I reached out to him, and he graciously agreed to come on. And it's interesting because Dell Med is a relatively brand new school. And so it was interesting to hear from him, which we're going to touch on in my interview with him, about the benefits of having institutional knowledge and the kind of some of the disadvantages of not having institutional knowledge. You've heard so far in a lot of these episodes so far, and I come from a school that's in a similar boat. Some of these schools have been established since the 1800s or the early 1900s. Our school is 176 years old right now. So we have a lot of institutional knowledge and tradition and things like that. So it was very interesting to get him on today. So I think you'll find our conversation very interesting. One thing I don't want you to do is run away from this episode, because you'll hear that the majority of the students that they take at Dell Med come from the state of Texas. But a lot of the information that you're going to hear Joel talk about pertains to all applicants to medical school. So hang in there. I think it'll be worth your time. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about the University of Texas Dell Medical School. They're located in Central Texas, and they were founded in 2013, and they just matriculated their first class just in 2016. So those students are now becoming fourth-year medical students this year. They are a part of the University of Texas at Austin, and which is a rather large university with more than 45,000 students. And if you aren't familiar with Austin, Texas, it is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States and is known as the live music capital of the world. They're also very well known and famous for the South by Southwest Festival and, of course, Texas barbecue. The Dell Medical School is a 21st century medical school. They're designed from the ground up at a top tier research university. It's in a vibrant, entrepreneurial, socially conscious, and conscientious city that is Austin. The vision of the Dell Medical School is to build a vital, inclusive health ecosystem focused on transforming the way people get and stay healthy. They aim to measurably improve health by educating leaders, developing new models of care, advancing innovation from health products to healthcare delivery, and building models that scale for increasing impact. Dell Med is a public institution and is required to have 90% of their class to be comprised of Texas residents, but they also accept some out-of-state residents. In addition to that, they also accept applicants from Canada, but not from international students or those that have the DACA status. In 2018, the medical school received 4,790 applications, and they interviewed 361 applicants for a class size of 50. 64% of that entering class in 2018 were comprised of women, and 20% self-identified as underrepresented in medicine. To give you a little more background on that entering class stats, for 2018, 82% of the incoming students had community service or volunteer experiences. 92% had physician shadowing or clinical observation experiences. 89% had medical or clinical community service or volunteering experiences. 31% had some type of paid medical or clinical employment, and 95% had research or lab experience. The mean GPA for students accepted to Dell Med in 2018 was 3.74, with a range of 3.16 to 4.0, and the median MCAT for accepted students was a 513.9, with a range of 506 to 521. So there's a little introduction there on Dell Med, and we're going to dive into the curricular highlights and the things they're looking for. We're going to talk about they're doing a lot of innovative things in their admissions process, which you'll hear about, and I'm considering doing for our process here at Case. So let me tell you about Joel Daboub. Mr. Joel Daboub is the Director of Admissions and Records at Dell Med. His responsibilities include implementing and managing the selection process for new candidates and also coordinating the registration and retention of students' academic records. Mr. Daboub has over 30 years of experience in higher education, which has allowed him to apply a wealth of experience and insight into the admissions process at Dell Med. As you will hear, he's particularly interested in the use of holistic review practices in the identification and selection of applicants. And he has given presentations at both the regional and national level on innovative approaches for mission-based admissions. Over his career, Mr. Daboub has been involved in the implementation of several large-scale information management systems. Now, he's used this experience in the development and integration of IT solutions to improve process flow and the effectiveness of admissions decision-makers' evaluations through applicant and student analytics. The bottom line on this is that Mr. Daboub is doing some pretty cutting-edge stuff in admissions down at Dell Med. Again, we're going to dive into that. So, you know what? With that, let's meet this guy and learn more about him. He's also going to go into some detail about the TMD SAS process, which is the application process for people applying to schools in Texas. And of course, we're going to talk everything Dell Med. So with that, let's jump into it with Mr. Daboub. All right. Hey, Joel, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you.
So I feel very lucky to have an admissions expert from the great state of Texas on today. And I think kind of what we're going to do today is we're going to start off talking about your giving us a breakdown, kind of walking us through the steps of the Texas Medical and Dental Schools application service. And then we'll go and talk about what your screening process is like, what you're looking for in your students. And then we'll talk about the curricular highlights of this new curriculum, or since you guys are a relatively almost a brand new school, talk about your curricular highlights. So why don't you first tell us I've read the bio your bio to the listeners, but kind of why don't you tell us, how did you get involved in admissions?
It was actually a career that I tried to run away from. My father was involved in admissions and worked in higher education for many years, and I thought that was certainly not the path I wanted to go. When I was as an undergraduate, I got involved. I was very involved in leadership and leadership organizations on campus, and one of those activities was being involved with the admissions office because I was proud of the institution I had attended and wanted to help recruit. And then I also wanted, at the end of my undergraduate career, to go in to get a graduate degree. and the opportunity was offered to continue working in the admissions office as I pursued my graduate degree, and that was every bit of my intention, was to finish my graduate work and then go into the private sector. And as fate would have it, I actually learned that I really enjoyed it. And every time that I have looked at what I was doing and said, I want to try something different, an opportunity has been afforded to me to try that new thing, that different activity, and continue to grow professionally. And so it's hard to believe it's been almost a little bit, a few months now, over 30 years working in higher education. And but each time, and each opportunity I have, I've been able to learn a great deal about myself and to also pursue interests I've had in the area and the profession, especially as it relates to technology and how we now use technology to help facilitate service and selection.
Yeah. What did your dad think when you told him you're going into the admissions world?
Well, so I went to work for somebody that he had known and had a great deal of respect for. And so when he learned that I'd be working for this gentleman, he was pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
They had a good relationship and had known each other for years. And so that gentleman was also a mentor to me. So he thought it was kind of humorous.
Yeah, that's really cool. That is really cool. So you're a new resident to Austin, right? Like you moved down to Austin from Dallas?
From Fort Worth, right?
From Fort Worth, yeah.
So we've been here about 4 years, and Texas is one of those states where you can drive in Texas for hours and never leave the border. It's a completely different region of Texas, but we have, and we really did, and still love Fort Worth a great deal as well. Mm-hmm. But we've really been able to adapt to Austin and all that Austin offers. Most people think of Austin as a community that really offers a lot for young people, and I agree with that. But we have been able to find our place here too pretty well.
What do you guys like to do for fun down there? What have you found that you enjoy about Austin?
Well, we are, my wife and I are pretty outdoor going type of people. And so when we have the time, we're out hiking or exploring. The wonderful thing about Central Texas is that there's a whole lot of these little tiny towns that were established in the 1800s throughout this area. And so we enjoy going to those small towns and visiting and often finding some really nice little barbecue hunts.
So you're a barbecue aficionado?
I don't call myself that because if I did, then I would fall in the camp of the people who really like Franklin's a great deal, which is world renowned, and it is for the purist who really loves the purity of the process and the meat. I'm one of those terrible people who puts a lot of barbecue sauce on their food. So
I'm sure some people are cringing right now, like, oh, he does.
So, but we it's kind of fun to kind of get a taste of different parts of the area.
Oh, that's fantastic. What would you say, Joel, is something that people are surprised to learn about you when they meet you?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that. I think so I think people would be surprised to learn that for a period of my life, I grew up in northern New Mexico in a 2-room adobe home with my parents who were kind of these back to the land hippies who wanted to go back and grow their own food and produce their own power. So I kind of had a communal life experience growing up. And I think when people meet me, they don't necessarily think of me that way. Wow.
That's crazy. It must have been a really interesting way to grow up for a while.
It was when you're young, you don't think it is,
right.
But when you look back, you think it actually was quite an extraordinary experience.
Oh man, that's really cool. Well, let's kind of switch gears now and kind of let's talk about TMDSAS, which I said a minute ago, it stands for the Texas Medical and Dental School Application Service. So I think to be clear to listeners that this is a separate process from AMCAS. This is the schools in Texas have their own system for application process. So can you start to walk us through, maybe demystify this application process that takes place for the medical schools in Texas?
Sure. And I should also mention that the title doesn't express all of the services that Team DCS offers. It's also the veterinary school application provider, Common App as well. So the first thing to know about the application service is it's actually the oldest application service in the country. It was actually established before AMCAS created a common application service. And the reason why it was created is we have a statutory mandate in Texas that 90% of our candidates be Texas residents at the time of matriculation. And so being part of a national application service would mean that we would spend a lot of time trying to get just the Texas applicants, because so many of our applicants have to be Texas residents. So the universities, it started with the University of Texas Medical Schools, began to develop a common application for the UT system, and then eventually began to encompass, or grew to encompass, a collaboration with all of the public medical schools in the state of Texas. So it's only public medical schools. So people might recognize that Baylor College of Medicine is on AMCAS and is a Texas medical school, but it's private. Okay. So all public Texas medical schools participate in the Team DCS application Common App service, and it's a consortium where we collaborate. And it really, I think, affords us the opportunity to manage the admissions process. Everything that the traffic rules that are established through Team DCS and the process are all developed with the intent on benefiting the applicant. And it really is designed to maximize the applicant's opportunity to acquire admission to the school of their choice. And we'll talk about this in a second, but as a result of that, we have something called the match, which is an undergraduate admissions match. And nationally, most people who are familiar with medical education think of the match as a graduate activity where you're matching into residency.
Right.
So the app is designed for Texas medical schools. However, most of the information one would fill out in the app is fairly similar to what you would fill out in the AMCAS application. Okay. It's obviously looking at past behavior and activities as they relate to leadership, innovation, research, healthcare exposure, community engagement, employment, socioeconomic information, all things one would think of that goes into the AMCAS. There are 3 essays that the students might seem to be that are fairly familiar, but fairly familiar topics that they would complete. But I think one of the things that's most notable about the application of the Team DCS is that it is a one-fee application. It means that you can apply to one school or all participating medical schools and only pay one fee. And so I think this year it's $160. Okay. And so what it affords, if you're thinking about applying to Texas public medical schools, it affords you an opportunity to select all to receive your application as you try to cast as wide a net as possible for your consideration into medical school. And then again, the old adage of what's the best medical school for me? Well, the first answer to that is the one that accepts me. And then if you get multiple acceptances, then it's really, you start to define and narrow down where you think you'd be most successful. Right. The aspect about the match, and let me spend a little bit of time talking about that. And let me distinguish the difference for Texas residents who are applying and out-of-state students who are applying. And so if you want to apply to a Texas medical school, you have to apply through Team DCS. If you're an out-of-state student, the deadlines are the same. However, you do not participate in the match, which is the selection match. So you don't have to rank order schools and preference them based on the schools that you interviewed at. So that's one distinction. The out-of-state offer period is a rolling process, and it starts the same time that the national offer process starts.
Okay.
And so we share those traffic rules with AMCAS as it relates to out of state. And then as we tail into the process at the conclusion of the cycle, we also will collaborate with AMCAS to make sure we're sharing data so that students aren't holding on to multiple offers past our shared traffic rules.
Yeah, April 30th. Yeah.
And for Texas residents, as you interview at medical schools, you have the opportunity to go into the Team DSCS portal and rank your preferences on the schools that you've interviewed with. And so, as my example, I try to not get too confusing when I give this example. But let's say you interview with 3 schools: School 1, School 2, and School 3, and you rank them in that order: 1, 2, and 3. And those are your preferences. Each of those schools is also going to submit a rank ordered list of their preferences of who they've interviewed. And with that system on February 1st, there's an algorithm that will marry the preferences based on seats available in each school and students' preferences. Now, prior to that, this is where it gets a little bit more confusing. So prior to that, there's a rolling admissions window starting on the 15th of November, running until, actually it'll be October 15th now, starting October 15th and running until mid-December, where you can receive multiple offers from medical schools on a kind of a rolling basis, and then you have to rank order those choices. So let's say you received one offer from school number 3 during that open window, and then you go into the match ranking 1, 2, and 3. The match occurs, and in the process of the match, you matched into school number 2, which automatically removes you out of school number 3, which then opens up that seat for another candidate. And then you, on February 1st, learn that you are now in school number 2, and you are waitlisted at school number 1.
Okay.
And so your preferences didn't move you into the first choice because they filled up before they hit your name on their list, but you were accepted, so you were waitlisted at that program.
Okay.
And so from that date until the May 15th date, you can be extended an offer off the wait list. So in that scenario, the couple things that happened. One is that you automatically were moved into your higher preference, and that seat that you were holding is automatically then given to somebody else who had a preference for that program.
At school 3.
So, at school 3.
Okay.
So
Got it.
what that allows us to do is really maximize students' preferences, and at the same time, give students opportunities earlier than waiting until we hear, somebody's holding on to 5 different offers.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Then we have to wait until the traffic rules to learn that actually they're only going to take offer number 1.
Yeah.
And there was 4 other students out there who could have been making plans to move to those cities to start school. And so that's why it's designed that way, to really kind of maximize that process. Now, let's say halfway through the waitlist window, you really begin to establish a relationship with your future classmates at school number 2. And school number 1 calls and says, "Hey, a seat just opened. You're next on our wait list. Would you like to accept that offer?" And at that point, you have a choice. You don't automatically move into school number 1. At that point, you can say, I've actually have really kind of connected with folks here, and I'm going to keep my offer here. And that then informs that school that they can move to the next person on the list, which is also fair too.
Yeah.
So that's a really short rundown of a lot of information.
But that's a great breakdown. Yeah, good examples. So Texas residents, I think I heard a myth, or I heard from people that thought this, that all Texas residents applying to medical school interview at every Texas school. True or not true?
That is not true.
Okay.
Now, we do have a program called JAMP, which is the Joint Admissions Medical Program, which is a special pathway program in which students are accepted in their freshman year of college. And if they meet all of the criteria and all the milestones in the program, then they are guaranteed an interview at each of the participating JAMP programs. Now, that's a population of less than 100 students usually.
Okay.
So that's a different pipeline program, but one that the state and we are very proud of, because it really focuses on attempting to get students access to resources that, because of their socioeconomic status, may not have had access to in high school, and then bring them up a little bit faster through undergraduate programs, getting prepared for medical school.
Okay.
But no, it's not a guarantee that you're going to be interviewed at any or one school. It's very much like AMCAS. We're reviewing candidates. Each school reviews candidates on the merit of the application that was submitted and how well that application fits into the institutional mission or the type of student that they're seeking. And then that then narrows the population down to the group that will be brought in for an on-premise interview. And then the process I described earlier is then utilized to select.
If I'm a Texas resident and I am the student that got into school number 2, that's where my acceptance is that I'm holding, but I'm on wait lists at schools outside of Texas. Any changes for me there? I can still remain on wait lists outside of the state of Texas?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so if you are accepted to or on the wait list at any out-of-state schools or AMCAS or COMA schools, then those traffic rules apply to you. And so you can hold on to multiple offers up until the dates that each program is set as the deadline.
Now, this year, AMCAS instituted the new Choose Your Medical School tools, where students have to, if they're accepted, they have to click a plan to enroll at least by April 30th at least one institution or at one institution. And then there are school-specific dates that come into play for the commit to enroll, which is then you are committing to that particular school that you intend to matriculate. Did the TMD SAS what's their process? Did they adopt a similar plan to enroll, commit to enroll, or is that separate?
Well, we have a separate deposit process. So if you went through the match, you're holding on to an offer from Dell Medical School, then you have an offer from Dell Medical School. But we did feed that data to AMCAS so that we had a clear picture. We shared that information. So we saw that the student is holding an offer at Dell Medical School and may also be holding an offer at school Z, whatever it might be. And then the student still has to adhere to the traffic rules for all programs. So they would need to narrow down a commit through Choose Your Medical School. Even if they were deciding to choose Dell Medical School, they would need to show that they were committed to do that, so the other school, out-of-state school, would understand that they were not planning on enrolling. Okay,
that makes sense. What about, you said in the TMD SAS, there's 3 essays that students have to respond to. And whereas in AMCAS, there's one required one that's, tell us about basically, why do you want to be a physician in essence. What are those 3? Do you know what those 3 essays are that students have to respond to?
So the first one would sound pretty familiar. It's to talk about your motivation for medicine and experiences that have drawn you to this profession. And hopefully, as you think about that response, you are giving the reader some insight into both your motivation and your growth in that motivation. And so you'll see milestones along the way that are also reflected in your vita of activity. One thing I would really encourage candidates to make sure that they do is that they answer the question. Sounds pretty nonsensical to say, but
right.
You'd be surprised how many times I will read a fabulously crafted essay that tells me a story, but it does not address the question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if they maybe copied it from another application, which had a different question. And the second question is about what unique experience, characteristics, or aspects about you would bring some diverse experience to the learning environment at that institution or in medical school. And then the third essay is an optional essay where you have an opportunity to talk about something that was not something that was asked earlier in the application, but you think is relevant to your application.
Okay.
And I really encourage candidates to, I cannot believe that you can't think of something to write there. Remember that your application is the only window we have into who you are. And to borrow from the real estate empire, location.
Mm-hmm.
Having that opportunity to tell more of your story and not utilizing it is a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
So definitely take advantage of that. Be sure too that as you think about your application, that it is a complete picture of who you are. We sometimes will read listings of activities that aren't reflected in the essays or vice versa. And so you're almost questioning, am I reading the same application?
Mm-hmm.
The analogy I like to use with students, so to borrow something from my childhood, when I grew up in northern New Mexico, there's a community of First Peoples who really tell their story well through the history, through weavings, through their weavings of their cultural history. And so I think of the application very much like that kind of storytelling tapestry. Each part of it is a thread, but it all should come together into one whole story. It should be woven together really well. And so when you're putting together your application, take the time to make sure that you have used all the space that's available to you. Little things like giving us an acronym, but not telling us what that acronym stands for.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help me a whole lot. Or
Right.
tell me you were the president and then not tell me what you were the president of. That isn't very helpful. So making sure that you use the space that's available to kind of craft that whole story.
Mm-hmm.
And taking the time to do a good job, because this is the first impression you're going to make. And if your first impression is that you don't have the time to do good work, then what's my second impression of you going to be?
Yeah. When you say about the acronyms and telling us what that is, or I oftentimes read, sometimes students write about like that they're in a band or an orchestra, and that they don't tell you what instrument they play. all the great things. We traveled to Europe and played in Vienna, and we were in these concerts and played at Rockefeller. But we don't even go as far to say what instrument you played. I'm like, oh, that's a opportunity there, maybe to connect with somebody that's, I played violin too, or I played in the percussion section as well. So just any other tips or advice that you see, or pitfalls, common pitfalls you've seen applicants in the TMD SAS process kind of, get tripped up on?
This might seem like application 101, but you'd be surprised. Take the time to go back and review the application after you've saved it, closed it, and then reopen it. Make sure that your formatting was carried over from what you copied over. Some people will use different word editing applications, will copy over into the web-based application their essays, and then they'll hit the submit button. Mm-hmm. And what didn't happen in that process is some of those hex characters that are part of the background you don't see in those applications that tell you how to format, or tell the application how to format, didn't get carried over to the web browser. And so then you see something that looks like a really long paragraph, and what the intent was, but it's a lot easier for the reader if it looks like the way you intended it to read. Care in the language that you use to be sure that you're grammatically correct.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be an English major. You certainly can have somebody read over I have a tendency to edit in my head, and then I don't realize that I didn't make that change on my document.
Yeah.
But every time I read over that sentence, I read the edit in my mind. I don't read the edit on the page. So having somebody just look at it with fresh eyes, you're not asking them to change your content or change your story. That's got to be yours and your voice. Just making sure that it reads well grammatically.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or tips about the application process? Did we touch on things that you find you get questions about from pre-medical students when you meet them about the application process?
The thing I would also encourage you to think about is it's not about the weight of the application. And what I mean by that is that we don't do number counts. We don't look at the number of hours and say, oh, this must be a substantive activity because, it's so many hours. I used to have an English professor who would, back in the day when we used to type our papers and hand them in, who would hold up in his hand your paper and say, well, this feels like an A. It weighs a lot. And of course, he was joking. That was what he was really trying to tell us, is that it's not how much it weighs, it's really what the content of it and how well you did. But it speaks to the same idea that it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of information you provide. Also, don't try to make your application seem what it isn't by double dipping, listing activities in multiple categories.
Yeah, good point.
It's either a volunteer activity, or it's a healthcare activity, or it's a leadership activity. It's not all three. So we will read all of it and put it together, but you need to decide where you think it best fits. And so sometimes we'll read an application where it just seems like you're trying to make each section fill out, and you're not really, you're not falsifying the application, but it doesn't seem as honest as it could be.
Looks a little fluffy. Mm-hmm.
Looks a little fluffy, absolutely. And again, what we're looking for is your past behavior, because we understand that the best indication of future behavior is what you've been engaged in the past. And so we want to see substantive activities in these domains of where you've engaged your community. And I guess we can talk a little bit more about this in a minute.
Yeah.
Have you gotten a good understanding of what the profession you're trying to join is like, through shadowing or volunteering or getting some exposure? And what have you done to work with groups and teams and lead in groups? And so those are what we're trying to see through the list of things that you've been engaged in.
Yeah, that track record is so important. So important. One other question I had that I wanted to ask you was, in AMCAS, they give the applicant the opportunity to identify 3 of their most meaningful activities. Does TMD SAS have that same feature, or do school specifics, Texas school specific, have their own similar kind of 3 most meaningful?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because we thought, as we looked at the application this last year and then saw what AMCAS was doing, we thought that was a best practice idea that we liked. And so we've actually incorporated that into the primary application this year.
Okay, great.
But many of the schools had a secondary application in which we garnered some of that information as well. So now it's on part of the primary.
Okay. Do you think it's okay for applicants that they're applying to AMCAS and the TMD SAS to copy and paste from one to another?
As far as it addresses the question being asked, but I would encourage you to make sure that you read the question and say, okay, does this really answer this? Or I'm just trying to be expedient and I'm just copying in here.
Yeah. Because
the risk is that as I read it with fresh eyes, I'm thinking, okay, did this truly answer this question? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then just be wary of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But obviously, you're not going to change your 3 best experiences for the Team DSS app because you want it to look different. If it's your 3 best experiences, it's your 3 best experiences.
Right. I guess my last question would be, from a pre-medical perspective, process-wise, does TMD SAS have a similar letter service and getting letters of recommendation to Texas medical schools as AMCAS does?
They have multiple channels that they receive letters. The nice thing about Team DCS is they do all the processing for the medical schools as far as preparing the application and verifying the coursework, and that the coursework taken meets the prerequisites for the Texas schools. They also vet the residency status based on the state statute and state regulations. So that minimizes the possibility of one school maybe incorrectly classifying a student as a Texas resident when they were not, or vice versa.
Okay.
So they do a lot of that front end work, and what it allows us to all have is an application that is consistent, and therefore we're all reading the same thing as medical schools.
Mm-hmm. I think to kind of put a bow on this, it's important to point out that TMDSES has what I found to be a really helpful website. They have a handbook, like a guidebook to help students through this application process. And from what I could find, they have, they're on Twitter and they're answering questions there. And from what I understand, they have 2 closed Facebook groups where staff are monitoring questions that come in there. Do you know of any other resources that students can access if they have questions during the application process?
Well, I think those resources you mentioned are great, and they also will answer your phone call too if you have a question. Okay. Now, my word of warning is, that's a great service they provide, but don't call every day with the same question and expect a different answer.
Right. Yeah.
Certainly not to be abused, but they certainly will respond. Yes, and I love their Twitter feed. They have some very creative people. Yeah. Much more creative minded than I am. And I think that they really are not only answering the questions, but they're doing it in a way that students find, a little anxiety relieving as well.
So I think maybe the best way to summarize this is, if you have questions, do your homework through the websites and the guidebooks and handbooks, and as much as you can capture from maybe social media feeds. And then if you still can't find the answer, then maybe resort to calling the folks, the staff there, and trying to get your question answered that way, so to make a best use of their time too.
Absolutely. I think that's a good advice for any time you are trying to seek an answer. Yeah. What you don't want to ask a question that has been obviously answered multiple times, but also to let the students know that all the Texas medical schools will respond to their inquiries as well. We all have an admissions email box. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But again, we appreciate it if you've taken the time to look at what our requirements are, for instance. And so if you're asking a question about our requirements that are clearly on the webpage, then we're going to point you, we're going to spend time to point you right back to that spot.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's switch gears here and let's dive into Dell Med. I mean, and just take it from, let's talk about the history of Dell Med. And then since we've established what the application process is like, then you can walk us through what you're looking forward to for applicants that are applying to Dell Med. So it's a relatively new school. Tell us the history about it.
Well, so you also have to hear a little bit about Texas history as well to kind of figure out why it has taken so long for a Tier 1 research institution like the State University of Texas to have a medical school in Austin. Okay. And the reason for that is actually when our founding fathers crafted the Constitution for Texas, they decided that the undergraduate institution would reside in the capital, but that the medical school would reside in the most populous city of the time, which was actually Galveston. And so the Constitution actually forbade a medical school being created in Austin. So a lot's happened in the last couple hundred years. Austin has grown dramatically. It is, and the citizens of Austin recognize that not having an academic health center in the city of Austin was to its detriment and not providing the kind of innovation that comes with having an academic health center in a large city. We have this large Tier 1 research institution, well established, nationally recognized institution, and the the folks in Austin, the leaders of Austin, said, "Why don't we have a medical school?" And so a couple things had to happen. The first one was that the Constitution had to get changed, and that happened. And then the city of Austin had to have a bond election in which they had to decide whether or not to raise their taxes to support the creation of a public medical school in the city. And this is unusual because most medical schools are funded through state appropriations, and this was really because it was the community at large that wanted to bring the school into being. Wow. They wanted to invest in it as well. Wow. So that vote occurred, and you have to imagine this vote was occurring during the financial crisis.
Oh, boy.
And so you can imagine people voting to increase their taxes with all of the insecurity associated with the financial crisis, and that bond measure passed.
Wow.
So for us, it is really a very important stewardship. Mm-hmm. It's incumbent on us to make sure that we are addressing the needs of this community. And you'll hear that again when we talk more about what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when you start thinking about the DNA of this institution, you have to first start with why it was created and who created it. And then, we are so fortunate to be in a community where there are folks like Michael Dell, who really put in the initial capital needed to create the school. Mm-hmm. And so his partnership, and it really is a partnership. It's not something where he simply said, I'm going to invest in this donation. He collaborates directly with our dean on a regular basis. Okay. And so he's a partner in this process, and rightfully so. It carries his name. Mm-hmm. The community is a partner. The university is a partner. And so as you start to think about all these activities that came together to create the school, you start to see what the vision of the school started at and as it's becoming. So the leadership that was chosen to lead Dell Medical School was also exceptional, and I would say, because I work for him, I think it's an exceptional choice, but I've worked for a lot of folks, and I can say that with 100% honesty, that choosing the dean of the medical school with a vision that Dr. Clay Johnston had really was the last piece of the puzzle to create this revolutionary medical school. And from his point of view, he was not looking to become dean of the next medical school. He was looking to look at how can we transform healthcare, and is there a role for me? And I hope I'm not speaking too much for him, but is there a role for me at this new institution to really make an impact in areas that he had seen as really deficits in healthcare, and not just him, but many leaders across the country see as deficits in healthcare. And so that was the last big piece of the puzzle. And as it came together, we really started to evolve into a catalyst for all these relationships. So Dell Medical School really sits at the crossroads between the community, the university, and all of the venture capital that exists here in Austin, all the creative things that are happening here in Austin, and really looking at policy and changing policy and being at the Capitol where those decisions are made. We really have a role to facilitate all of that activity as a catalyst to change. So when you think about the starts of the institution, a relatively brand new institution nestled next to a very large established Tier 1 institution. Mm-hmm. We're part of the University of Texas at Austin. We're a program within the School of the University of Texas at Austin. But we also have these other relationships across the city and the state. Then it makes more sense about why the mission of the institution is to revolutionize how people get and stay healthy, and how can we make Austin a model healthy city. So when you think about that charge, you hear a couple things. You hear about revolutionizing healthcare. How do we change systems that we think are fundamentally broken? We believe that as a premise that the fee-for-service model drives quantity, it doesn't drive quality.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself has fragmented healthcare in a way that does not produce value for the patients who require it. How do we make Austin a model healthy city? And we look at the entire city, not just populations who can afford healthcare, but populations who have no access to healthy food or don't have access to quality care. How do we make the systems of care across our community one that benefits every member of our community, not just segments of the community?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of making those kinds of revolutionary and quantifiable changes, can Austin then become a model for other cities across the country? And so it's attracted a lot of experts from across the country who looked at what was happening at Dell Medical School and saying that they had struggled within the systems they'd been in, and they really saw that there was fundamental change that needed to happen. And so we have attracted people from across the country from many different institutions who are experts in their own right, nationally recognized in their own fields, and looking at how do we change these models of care. So that revolution is happening on the larger scale of the institution as it's being created and growing. But then look at fundamentally what the role of the school is to create future physicians. So as we think about how we're going to create future physicians, with the folks in medical education, Dr. Cox and Dr. Nelson and other members of the community medical educators looked around the world, and mostly around the nation, and said, what are the things that are working? What are the best practices in medical education? And how do we create an environment in which our students are not only going to acquire the skills they need to be outstanding clinicians, but also recognizing that the future physician is going to have other skills or need skill sets that are not taught in medical school. And how do we help them acquire those additional skills that are going to make them impactful in how they change how healthcare is delivered in the future? And that our curriculum is relatively novel when you look at it in its totality. But when you start to break it apart, you recognize there are elements from other institutions across the country that had evidence of success in training physicians in that manner. So it's really looking at those best practices and bringing that together into one model, with the idea that we want to graduate students who, because we're a small school, we have 50 mm-hmm. students per class. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about that, it's trying to find a group of students that we can identify that really fit what we're trying to do as a mission, but also provide them with the tools to create skills or develop skills that are allow them to think about how healthcare is provided, and not say, well, it's always been done that way, right, therefore I'm going to practice that way. But to look at it and say, it is ridiculous that we make people come back 3 or 4 times for an appointment to see 3 or 4 different individuals for the complex situation or systems of pathology they have that they need care for. So how do you revolutionize that care model? And one of the things our dean did is when we started developing our practice plan is, and with the work of our design institute, which is another unique aspect of Dell Medical School, actually incorporating a center of design into the medical school. But looking at how, this is a relatively small example, but looking at how patients are traditionally interfaced with ambulatory care. And they come into a waiting room, they come in for an appointment, and they wait for usually longer than when their appointment was for. And they wait in a room with people who are also there to see the physician because they're ill, mm-hmm. and probably carrying some other pathology that they don't have and they may have by the time they walk out the door. And so the recognition was that the waiting room is an admission of failure. And so how do you design care in which you don't have waiting rooms? And that was a real challenge, and it's actually something that we've implemented into our practice plan. Wow. Also, how do we have practice units where instead of you coming back to see 3 people on 3 different appointments, which you have to schedule and manage, why not come in one time and see those 3 practitioners during the course of your care and your visit at that one time. And so integrated practice units were also something that was incorporated. So these are examples, small examples, and I'm in no way an expert in any of these areas. Only what I've seen on the periphery I could talk about. But that philosophy about how do we change healthcare propagates all the way down into the curriculum.
Yeah. It's fascinating to have you describe how like a medical school was built from the ground up in recent time, right? Like it's a lot of schools I've spoken with so far have been established since 1893 or 1904, and this is really a different approach to how do you build a medical school in the 21st century?
Well, it really was. It's a wonderful opportunity because there's no institutional history to have to change. It's also an enormous challenge because there's no institutional history for you to rely on. But we've been teaching medical students the same way since Flexner developed his report on the unified model for educating physicians, and a lot has changed in that 100 years. And so we looked at that and said, does that still make sense? And the curriculum really threw a lot of that out and said, okay, what do we need to really train, and what skills do physicians really need to have in today's world?
Yeah. Before we get to that, Joel, let's start with it. Okay. How do I get in there? Like, what are you guys looking for? So can you walk us through some parts of your application process? What's the screening process like at Dell Med? What's the interview day experience like? What can they expect?
Sure. So the first thing, let me kind of back up a little bit and talk a little bit about how holistically we review the application. And you hear that as a buzzword, but let me kind of break it down into what does that mean for us. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find candidates who strike a balance, who possess both content mastery through evidence of academic performance and other means, and possess the skills. Some people argue that they're traits. I think that more evidence is available now that suggests these are really skills that align with our mission as it relates to areas of innovation and creativity, leadership and teamwork, and community engagement. And so you're going to hear me say those over and over again because that's I want to really kind of hammer that home. Yeah. But if you start thinking about how we were created, who created us, and what our responsibilities are, that'll start to make more sense of why those are important to us. So, I think everybody gets trapped into this idea of, and it's almost turned into this binary choice. And I think it's been popularized as a binary choice. And that is either you have the grades, so you are really, as the euphemism used to be when I was young, you're really book smart, or you are this great advocate, social extrovert who is engaged in their community. And so you really have what my old students who I used to advise called people skills, or they were a people person. But somehow these two domains are not interrelated, that they're two separate binary choices. And in fact, we've even allowed that social construct to enter into the world of interdisciplinary teams, and has allowed people to be inappropriate because we argue, well, they're really, really bright, so therefore that's why they behave that way. No, they're really they're just an SOB, and that's why they behave that way. They just happen to be able to retain information, so that's great. So I think that if you start from that premise that we're really trying to find individuals who strike a balance. So from the cognitive perspective, we are looking at past behavior, and this is another thing that I kind of bristle at a little bit. So we tend to talk about things about how smart somebody is, and I think that is such a wrong-headed way of thinking about competency attainment, because there are a number of people who are cognitively very bright, but who have not acquired the foundational knowledge necessary to start in our curriculum.
That's a good point.
So what does that mean when I say foundation? So we're not going to reteach the concepts that are necessary to come in with as prerequisites. Those are foundational. If you're building a house, You've been building a foundation, and then we're going to build the rest of that structure on top of that. And so you have acquired those competencies. And the way you've demonstrated that is through the rigor of work that you've taken. We look at trends. We don't look at just totals and say, oh, well, this person has this GPA, so therefore that's the pass. We look at, did they start slow and rise up? They could have started high and rose down, which is concerning because if the work got more rigorous, did they take just the minimum prerequisites, or did they choose to take more rigorous material? And so, the example there I would give is, so you look at a student who has a 4.0 and a student with a 3.6. I would ask then, who is the student who's acquired more of the competencies? Well, if you look at just GPA, you say, well, the 4.0 student. But then if you look at the coursework taken, you realize that they took just the minimal requirements and they took them over an extended period of time. And so they've got the foundation, but the 3.6 has actually been much more engaged in rigorous material, more advanced study. So who then is really the better candidate? Who's developed the stronger competencies?
Yeah. I'm glad you said it. People are seeing how we connect dots when we're reviewing applications, right? Like, it's not just the number and we do cutoffs and things like that.
Absolutely. And I get that question quite a bit. What is your cutoff? Well, I'm not going to tell you a number because I might see a student someday that has a relatively low overall. But if you look at their life history and what they've overcome, the last few years of work where they've really decided medicine is what they wanted to do, and they acquired those competencies and they were successful at it, that's who I'm trying to identify.
Absolutely.
Because what we're for this domain, on the cognitive domain, what you're looking for is, if you start in our curriculum, and we'll talk about our curriculum in a minute, which is an accelerated curriculum, you're going to be successful at managing the information. You're going to be able to acquire the information, and you've already demonstrated the ability to acquire information through evidence of past behavior, as well as the standardized exam, which has really kind of a bimodal purpose, which is the MCAT. So you have demonstrated through these efforts that you've developed these competencies. And so, again, the best indication of future behavior is your past behavior. So that's one domain. And as we're screening the applications, we're looking at that, but then we're also looking at those non-cognitive domains. And so if you think of a Venn diagram with two circles overlapping, we're also looking for those students who have demonstrated substantive activity in areas of innovation and creativity, leadership and teamwork, and community engagement. So where those two intersect, that's really the student that we're looking for, the applicant that we're looking for to move to the next step. And we'll get calls from candidates who say, I don't know why I have not yet received a secondary from you. I have a 4.0, 100% MCAT. What else could there be? Well, the answer is either you're still under review, and they're always under review, but you're being reviewed. But we may not have really shown us that balance, where somebody with maybe a lower combination, but have actually demonstrated competency and have these other strengths. And an inverse of that is true too. Somebody who's maybe worked in the Peace Corps for 2 years, drilling wells for fresh water for communities that had no fresh water, something very substantively engaged in a community, trying to improve the health of the community. But they haven't yet developed those competencies in order to be successful in our curriculum. So their risk of not being successful is higher. So trying to find that balance is what we do through our review. And then we invite students who we've identified to do something that's pretty unique. And that's the video secondary application.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
So if you're invited to, now you can choose two paths. You can choose, if you don't feel comfortable with the video, to do the written secondary, or you can choose to do the video secondary. Overwhelmingly, though, the students that have filled out the survey at the end have said that they felt like this was a way to tell their story in a way that the written secondary or the written application could not. But the video secondary is, once you start, you are invited to test your equipment. You're invited to practice how the process works and record yourself. And then once you're ready to begin, you have 3 questions to answer. And not surprisingly, the 3 questions are in the domains of innovation, creativity, leadership and teamwork, and community engagement. but they're questions that relate to your past experiences, past behavior, and things that you may have learned along the way through that. But you'll push on the first button for the first question. One of our students will pop up on your computer, and a little video question that they'll ask you to respond to. There's a 5-second delay. The question is repeated. There's a 30-second countdown, and as soon as that 30 seconds is up, the system will take over your camera, and then you'll begin to respond. And almost as if
so cool.
Yeah, so you're sitting across the table from an interviewer, and they ask you a question.
Yeah.
Very similarly, you will be asked to respond. Now, you can't stop, you can't edit, and we understand that we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for
one take.
One take. Yeah. We're asking you to kind of express to us how you would respond to this question or something that you may have learned about this experience. And even halfway through, if you decide, that's a good example, but now that I think about it, a better example might be this. And so your ability to manage that narrative in that 2-minute window to tell us more of that story. So that secondary is evaluated by an individual who's an experienced interviewer. And then your application is then read independently by 2 other application reviewers and scored based on what you've written in the application and your experiences. And all 3 of those reviews are non-cognitive reviews, meaning that none of the 3 reviewers know your MCAT, your GPA, anything about your academic performance. They're looking solely at the non-cognitive attributes that we think are relevant to our mission. And based on those 3 combined evaluations, we then decide who to invite for an on-premise interview.
Wow.
So that gets us to that point. And then, remember I mentioned that we don't have any institutional history to fall back on. And we also recognize something else that was important, and that is that while this process will be iterative to develop, it'll be hard to be a process where we keep adding. So we need to be iterative in the way that we might be deducting. So we looked at what are we trying to assess, and what is the evidence out there as far as admissions is concerned at the different types of evaluations that are available to assess these different domains. And so we used to do 2 traditional interviews, but the video interviews now replaced one of the traditional interviews because we find that those are correlating well.
Yeah.
And again, another part of our mission or our charge is that as we look at innovative ways to improve systems, whether it's systems of education or systems of care, we have to be able to quantify that in fact is effective. And that's what we do with every part of our evaluation process. We do a traditional interview with a physician here on campus, and then we do 5 multi-mini interview stations. And looking back at the voluminous work on multi-mini interviews and what they correlate with, if you think about the findings of those academics who found that the multi-mini interview really correlates with clinical performance, and then you think about how our curriculum, our students start clinical activity in their second year, not their third year. And so again, trying to identify students who maybe have either nascent or learned behaviors that are going to be supportive of kind of that rapid introduction to the clinical environment. And then we do something called the group exercise. And again, if you think about most of our curriculum is team-based learning. So when we will kind of diverge a little bit, talk about our curriculum for a second, but I think it's important.
Sure.
A lot of students will ask me when I'm traveling to recruiting, do you tape your lectures or record them online, and do I have to go to class? And what a student is really asking me at that point is, I've already become very astute at acquiring knowledge. I can go to a lecture and listen to the information and record my notes, and I can read the text, and I can acquire articles, and I can pull that information together. I can look at the PowerPoints. I'm already very good at that, and you know that because I've done that as an undergraduate.
Yep.
So if you look at Bloom's taxonomy of learning, you know that knowledge acquisition is one of those layers of maturation. So yes, that's a skill you have to develop, and so they've already started to develop that really well. The next phase of learning is really knowledge application. And so that's where you take what you've learned and then in a non-exact scenario, see if you can discern or critically think through how to solve that problem. So and this is an important distinction for our curriculum because you have to, and we look for evidence of this in the application as well, you have to really be somebody who's a self-directed learner. You have to be comfortable with the idea that you're going to acquire a lot of information outside the classroom as part of your group. You're going to spend a lot of time acquiring it together or separate and then bringing it together as a group and working together to build your course objectives or your learning objectives for that topic. But when you're in class, it's not a lecture. You're in class with the knowledge expert, and it's an exchange of information going back and forth. And it's how well did you understand as a group this concept? Okay, we don't need to spend a lot of time going back over these. Let's talk about this other concept. Or, for instance, in the physiology course, on one of the sections on cardiology, you'll have 5 cardiologists in the room working together with the students, working through cases to make sure they understand whatever the particular topic will be as they start to build those pieces together. So if you had tried to record that and then listen to it later, it'd be completely nonsensical. You wouldn't know what they were talking about. So team and teamwork is so important in our curriculum. If you don't like working in teams, we are the worst place to go.
We are too. It's the same thing. You're going to be grouchy for a long time.
Right. In fact, when we told our inaugural class, they admitted to us after they matriculated, they said, you told us that the curriculum was going to be team-based, and quite frankly, I was really concerned about that coming in, because as an undergraduate, I had been part of a lot of learning teams, and quite honestly, I did 80% of the work, and everybody else did 20% of the work, and so I just thought, I don't know if I can do that in medical school.
Right.
But what they learned was that everybody on their team was that person who did 80% of the work.
Yeah.
So the team learning environment became completely different. And in fact, they felt so obligated to be prepared that there was a kind of a self-induced peer pressure that I don't want to let my teammates down because I've got to get this material because I've obligated to get this particular material put together before we meet as a group. And so, as they said, that team learning experience was a completely different dynamic. And we see evidence of that being successful as well. Yeah. So let me roll back a bit and talk about the interview day.
Sure. Yeah.
And it'll make more sense why we've incorporated this other interview type that we're testing right now and have been utilizing from the beginning. And it's a group exercise. And so we invite 5 candidates to sit around a table and collaborate on a problem. And so it's really, can you work on this problem? Can you produce a product at the end? And how do you collaborate as a group to do that? And so it's a team learning exercise and team exercise. And so we do that as part of the interview day as well. So in the course of an interview day, you're going to come in contact with 6 different evaluators. Your file has been read by 2 separate evaluators, and your video is evaluated by an independent evaluator as well. So there are 60 points of evaluation that are acquired over the course of that assessment. And it's all matched back, and it all is driven back to what is our mission and what are the attributes that we're looking for. So we have purposely drawn direct connections for each point of evaluation with either a attribute or an experience that we think is important, communication, or a mission fit attribute. So those are all drawn back to. So we don't do anything that doesn't have some logic to why we created it.
Yeah.
So all that together comes together for the evaluation by the committee.
That's a lot of data points. Any advice? What advice do you give students that are coming to interview at Dell Med? Things to prepare for. How should they prepare? Because they want to come, like they feel like they're going to be able to put their best foot forward when they get there.
Right. So we actually send out before their interview a rather lengthy document talking about each of the interview types and how to prepare for that interview type.
Great.
And we were one of the first schools, I think we were the first school to introduce MMI in Texas. Oh. So that was new for a lot of our Texas applicants. They'd never heard of the MMI before. I have a student who crafted this statement. I think it's just so appropriate to describe the MMI. And he says, the MMI is a lot like 6th grade math homework. He said, "It doesn't matter if you got the answer right or not if you don't show your work." And I thought that's such an appropriate analogy.
That is great.
And so it helps students realize it's really about talking about how you evaluate the scenario you've been given and how you work through. And then when you're prompted, how do you then assess that information and adjust to it? So it's not something that one practices, except for practicing the format. I mean, getting comfortable with the format is always helpful, but it's really about you thinking about the scenario and how you would answer it and being able to answer it effectively. And knowing that there's never a right answer. There are variation and degrees of answers that you could give and still be appropriately answering the question. The traditional interview is, I think, is much easier because people are more familiar, more comfortable with that. But the interviewer has read your experiences and your essay. They don't know anything about your academics, but they read your experiences and essays. And so they're going to talk to you more about what unique contribution can you bring to the classroom? What is something that you have done that maybe no one else has done? Can you tell me more about that experience? So if you can't describe something on your application, then you need to think about what you wrote.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where that kind of comes back and bites you. That fluffiness, you could fluff it up, but if you're asked a question about it and you can't really respond with much depth, it becomes more evident that it's fluff.
That's not good. What about, to kind of wrap up the interview day, I was going to ask, you said the one-on-one interview, they have access to full application except for metrics, right?
No, they actually only have full application since they see the essays and the list of activities.
Okay.
So nothing about socioeconomic or letters of recommendation are not introduced until the very end with the committee.
Okay. And I guess my last question about the interview day, since people have now been hearing you here for a little while on this podcast, are you involved in the interview day? Do they get to meet you?
Absolutely. I'm more involved than I want to be some days. So, what's really exciting about working here, so this entire process relies heavily on the contribution of faculty, staff, and community members here in Austin who take the time to be trained on how to do the interviews. Because it's such an intensive interview day, we actually require more volunteers than student applicants who are interviewed to make the process work.
Yeah, it takes a lot of manpower to do MMI.
It is a lot of manpower, but it takes a lot of people who are willing to volunteer and contribute to the process regularly. So I organize, I manage. There's one other person in my office, Ms. Gabby Laredo, who coordinates, but that's it for the management of the interview days for our staffing. So the rest of it really relies heavily on the contributions of our community of DMS and larger. And what's really exciting is that I have people constantly inquiring. I think we're probably one of the fastest growing health science centers in the country, but every time we get new docs on board and I'm getting emails asking, "Hey, I just got hired. I'd like to learn more about the admissions process," which is really
that's cool.
Refreshing to have that. So I'm involved in as much as we communicate constantly with a candidate before they arrive. I present information and I talk about the Team DCS match process and talk about the day. And then I'm here to make sure that the process runs smoothly. But a big part of the day is the interview experience and then our students and the applicants getting to talk. And a big part of that is them talking together without anybody who works for the institution in the room. And I think that's really important. Our students said that was important too. That they talk about what's good, what's bad, what works, what do you struggle with? And that's where it kind of comes out. Hey, if you look at our schedule, it looks pretty light, but this is what I'm doing every day to get prepared for that. And so they get some real insight to what it means to be part of a team.
So it looks like I have about maybe 10 minutes left with you today. And if you want to hit some of the highlights of the Dell Med curriculum, what would you want people to know about some of those curricular highlights that you have down there?
So I think one of the things that as we mentioned earlier, we really looked at the curriculum, and I say we, as a large ask of all of the faculty and deans in the medical education department, and developed a curriculum that is unique in that the first 12 months of the curriculum is the basic science curriculum. And in the old Flexler model, that's either 16 or 18 months. And so it's condensed down, accelerated into 12 months, which allows us then to begin clinical education on the second year. And so you have a couple of weeks off, and then you start in the wards, working in your clinical rotations. And then after that, you take the first step exam. And what we hear repeatedly from our inaugural class who went through that process is that having seen the pathology in the clinics and in the drugs in the clinics and getting that reinforced really helped them when they went through the vignettes and said, okay, here's the scenario. And they immediately could identify the pathology. So that meant now that they're not working through 5 choices, they're now working through 2 choices usually. And so then it's really then getting back into the basic science that they went back and prepped on before they took the exam. And so we've seen that has really helped them acquire and retain that information. But then it opens up our third year, and this is where, when I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation about what are those skills that our physicians in the future are going to need to have that are not necessarily taught in the clinical or basic science environment. And in that third year, our students have a growth year where they can do several things of their choice. One is they can choose to do a dual degree. So they can take advantage in 9 months. They can acquire an MBA from the Macomb School of Business. They can acquire a public health degree, Master's of Public Health, a degree in biomedical engineering, a master's degree in biomedical engineering. This year, there's going to be a value-based business degree offered, value-based healthcare degree, and a master's program, and a master's in design and design thinking.
Are those,
or they can
I ask you real quick, is there additional tuition for those master's programs?
There's only additional tuition for the Macomb School of Business, and it's a top 10 business school and a relatively expensive program. So there is a discounted rate for the medical students, but they still pay additional tuition for that.
So it's not a bad deal.
No, it's a great deal. A great deal, and it's not something where you have to rob from one part of the curriculum to pay for the other. So you're not having to give up electives in clinic or clinical electives to fill with coursework to get the dual degree. You're actually able to get everything acquired within that 9-month period. Now, some of our business students have chosen to do some things in the summer, like do a 2-week program in another country that will result in college credit for the MBA as well. So they're doing that as we speak right now as well. Or you can do a research intensive project. And that research is not necessarily bench research, although it can be. But it could be also research into public policy or public health. An example of that, one of our students who's very focused on geriatric care and care of individuals who live in the community where she's from in East Austin.
Oh, wow.
Did work with connecting healthcare with the housing authority as it relates to a particular housing complex for geriatric residents, and developed really went and actually looked at what are the barriers to care and what are the things that this population experiences in this assisted housing, and how can you develop communities in which not only improves the community experience but also improves their healthcare or their health overall.
That's outstanding.
And she's presenting that at a national conference here pretty soon. So that's an example of kind of that type of research activity.
Yeah.
Or you can work with the design group and be assigned a population health or the term escapes me at the minute, but looking at research in device design, for instance, moving it from protocol to actually moving it into into the healthcare realm, and it's an entrepreneurship in residence program.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of different options. And as you go through the first 2 years, you get exposed to a lot of folks in our community who are really eager to get students engaged in whatever they're working on. And so you kind of learn about what you're interested in, and you start to develop that interest. I also failed to mention there's also a graduate degree in education psychology, which is really important. If you're thinking about going into academic medicine, understanding how people learn and the education behind that is really an important tool as well. So that third year, I think, is a big distinction. And again, it's allowing our students to develop other skills where we say, if we've advocated the responsibility for managing healthcare to individuals with a business background, who do not have a healthcare background, how do physicians get a seat at that table? They have to have that equal background. And so we have individuals who are looking at how they will change administration of healthcare or healthcare policy, or looking at design and how do we solve systems of care, create new systems of care that are more effective. So that is really what that third year is about. Fourth year, very much similar to the rest of the world as our students start going away to experience other educational centers, other healthcare centers, and then as they begin to apply for residency. The one distinction, and this is not completely distinct or not unique just to us, but we do require our students to do 2 acting internships during that year, where the expectation of their performance is much higher than a traditional fourth year. They are expected to perform at the level of a first-year resident. And so they're measured on that domain. And that's really in getting them prepared to go into graduate medical education and having all of the entrustables really develop so that they're hitting the ground running as a new resident.
Joel, is that separate from the capstone transition to residency experience, or is that what you're speaking about?
It's in addition to,
Okay.
So the capstone, so that capstone transition is really looking at how do schools prepare students with these certain entrustables and verify that they have them.
Okay. Is that kind of like a residency boot camp, like a 4th year boot camp kind of thing before they then move on to residency?
We have a milestone for that prior to re-entering into the clinical environment. And then they'll have a milestone at the end that's that kind of like that residency boot camp. But the AI experience is really a 6-week experience where they're really being measured by the attending who also has interns on their service. And are you performing at that level?
Yeah, making sure they're tip top shape,
right?
Ready to move on to that next part of their training. Let's see, quick questions. Pass fail the first 2 years?
Pass fail first year.
Okay.
Pass fail honors the second year. If you do a dual degree, then whatever grading schema that program utilizes is the grading schema that you would use because that's their accreditation. And then pass fail honors in the 4th year. AOA and other types of designations will be based on primarily on the clinical pass fail honors.
What is there a summer break in between the first and second year, or does it just go right into second year clinicals?
They get a couple of weeks, and then they go right into clinicals, and so that's another thing to be mindful of. If you would like that long extended 2 or 3 months to do other activities, it's not something that we really are afforded in our curriculum. But again, that then is paid off in the 3rd year where you get that other opportunity.
Yeah. So if students want to do things internationally, because that's a common question that we get, are they doing it primarily in that growth year of year 3?
Yes, although that really hasn't been a lot of folks' focus. They've been more focused in our community and thinking about our mission. That's important to note.
Yes.
But actually, a couple of our students are looking at doing some of that in their 4th year. Some of our students did the international experience through the MBA program, but it's a different focus. It's more looking at systems and sustainable systems in other countries. We do have a Office of Population Health that has a division chief who's very actively involved in international healthcare exchange programs, and he has a lot of opportunities that students, if they're interested, can always engage him with. But I think that'll start growing in more and more popularity.
Sure. Okay, so I want to be mindful of your time here. We're just down a couple minutes here.
That's okay. We can go a little bit over. That's fine.
Okay. What is there something about the curriculum? I really like the way that it's broken down. I mean, your website's beautiful, and the way the curriculum is broken down into these chapters, almost like essentials, delivery, growth, and exploration. I think that's a really cool, simple way to break down a very complex medical education system. Is there something that you'd like students to know, or potential students to know, about your curriculum that may not be found on a sharp-looking website?
I think the first thing is that, and so I get, I don't bristle at this, but I get this question from candidates a lot about how will your program prepare me for residency, or how will it prepare me for STEP? And I have to.
It's hard not to bristle at those questions.
Yeah, and so, like anything in life, it is about what you engage in and what you contribute as to the output or the outcome for you. And so you can be successful at acquiring a competitive residency or doing exceptionally well on the licensure exams at any accredited institution in the country if you do the work to get there.
Yeah.
So, so what is wonderful about our curriculum is that it is full of opportunities. And what we're trying to identify are individuals who are going to fully engage in those opportunities. And so it is not a curriculum where if you are more passive, and I don't mean passive in a negative way, I mean you're more receptive to getting content and then processing it, or learning about what opportunities are available and then being asked to participate. This is much more. There is a cornucopia of opportunities, and what we want to see our students do based on evidence from their past behavior, get engaged in these opportunities and utilize their time here to the maximum. And so I think that if you're not interested in the growth year, and you're thinking, I really truly just want to be a clinician and a great clinician, and I'm not really interested in doing anything in that fourth year, then we may not be the best choice. Yeah. And it would be a shame that, because you can get that experience at a lot of very outstanding institutions with different missions, if that wasn't, somebody else could have taken advantage of that opportunity. And so I want candidates to think about, how hard am I willing to work? Mm-hmm. And when I say hard work, I mean, how hard am I willing to get engaged and take advantage of these opportunities? How am I going to use my time? Mm-hmm. A great example of this, I think of our inaugural class. We already knew that compressed curriculum was going to be challenging. And so we really wanted them to focus on just getting through the curriculum, making sure they hit all their milestones, making sure that their assessments were identifying their weaknesses and their strengths, and that they were capturing that information. And as our students got more comfortable with the curriculum, they started to look for opportunities even in their first year. And a couple of our students who met each other through the curriculum realized that they both previously had been teachers. And they really, really loved the classroom. And so on their own, they went out and filled out a grant application for a STEM academy at a local high school that didn't have a science program. And they created this young STEM academy program at a local Title IX school here in Austin. Mm-hmm. And they did that on their own, and that has become one of the more popular programs for students to get engaged in here on our campus.
That's great.
So what is that an example of? That's an example of two things, really. One is through evidence of their past behavior, we recognize that these two individuals really enjoyed engaging in teaching. And it was something that they were so passionate about that they felt the need to continue to explore that, even while they're in this very rigorous curriculum. And the other is that there was an environment here that was supportive of that it's one of the great things about being a new school, and the scary thing about being a new school, is we don't have any clubs or organizations starting out.
Yeah, right.
And so, you decide where the sidewalks go. You decide what you want to get engaged in. You decide what you want to participate in. And as a result of that, we really have this organic experience of students creating ideas that really help them continue on some of the things that they've been involved in or their passions, or learn about new passions as well.
So you sound pretty connected to the student body. As you alluded to, it's the smaller classes. What have you heard that students like most about Dell Med or the curriculum? Is there something that you kind of a common theme that you hear from the current students that they really seem enthusiastic about, or they seem to like most about the institution?
And I have to say that one of the things that really attracted me here was this idea of having only 50 students. And so being able to know everything about their application and remembering in a conversation with them, they always will say, "How do you remember that?" I said, "Well, I just remember your application."
Yeah.
I think the collaborative nature, I have never been part of a program. Our inaugural class, with the exception of very few, all went on spring break together.
No way.
They literally planned a trip together.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it's really a collaborative environment. We really want people who enjoy working with other people and collaborating. And I think it's evident in the environment it's our third floor, which is our student floor. You see evidence of that there. So I think that's one thing that especially for people who really like self-directed learning, they like the idea of spending their time with knowledge experts, really trying to figure out what they don't and do know, as opposed to and being actively involved in the learning process there. I think another thing that students, as they start to progress through the curriculum, really like is that, while it's a hard year, next year is something different.
Yeah, it's true.
So there's a really hard year in basic science, and now you're going into clinical rotations the next year. Yeah. As the clinical rotations end, and that was a really hard year, and now you're going into your dual degree program. And what was kind of ironic or funny, haha, with our inaugural classes, they were just so tired after the second year of clinical rotations and studying for shelves, and they thought, "Oh, this third year is going to be so easy. If I can work 24 hours straight in OB, I can do the MBA program standing on my head." But they soon learned it's a whole different kind of hard.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Dual degree. So they've grown each year in a different way. And so that, I think, is something that is novel about this, is that each year is a transition to something different. And it really has made, I think, the time feel like it's flown by.
I bet. So from what I've read, this is the fourth year class. Like the inaugural classes are now fourth years, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So an exciting year then to see them wrap up this inaugural class, wrapping up their education. Joel, I think we've kind of put our feet on all the bases here. Is there anything as we kind of wrap up that you wanted to get out there, you didn't think we kind of hit on at all?
I think the really important thing to think about as a pre-med, as you're thinking about why you want to go into this profession, where do you want to pursue your education, is what is the mission of the institutions that you're applying to? What are they trying to identify? First, we want to make sure that you're a competent clinician, and I think maybe your audience has heard of the term GUMP before, which is a generalized, undifferentiated medical professional. That's the output of the baseline. But after that, what is that institution trying to do, and how well does that fit what I'm interested in? And you think about our community commitment to this school, and you think about what we're committed to doing for our community. Obviously, community engagement and an interest in social justice and interest in equity is really an important part of the pillar of our school. When you think about working environment where you're going to be collaborating with all types of care individuals, when you're looking at person-centered care, then leadership and teamwork, the ability to collaborate and not always be the leader, is an important part of us. And if you think about how we're trying to come up with novel solutions, so innovation and creativity, it can be research, but it could be other ways of solving problems. Those are going to be important things that we want to see as well.
Yeah.
So it's it's not, and again, it's got to be substantive. What are you passionate about? And it's okay if what you're passionate about is not what we're focused on, and vice versa. So I think you have to think about what your passions are. You know what your goal is, and you are going down this pathway because you have been inspired to become a clinician, and that's an important foundation. Mm-hmm. And you have to continue to develop that motivation, because something's going to have to keep you in your chair at 3:00 in the morning,
absolutely,
studying while your friends are Instagramming or they're out having fun. Right. I think I got that reference right. I don't know anything about Instagram. Okay.
We'll double check with our kids.
All right. But you have to really think about what's the institution mission and what they're trying to accomplish. And hopefully it's something that what we're trying to do attracts a lot of folks. And I think that those who are accepted, if they take advantage of all the opportunities here to really grow in those ways that our curriculum is designed to help them grow, I think we're going to see things develop from them that are going to astonish us and truly meet our mission of making Austin a model healthy city.
That's tremendous. Well, Joel, to wrap things up here, I always like to ask my guests, like, are there any books, podcasts, websites, things that you would recommend to our listeners, whether it's medically related or non-medically related, that you find interesting or enjoy reading or listening to?
There's a book out there called Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I think is really a terrific book. There's another one out there that I just enjoyed thoroughly reading, and I always try to recommend it to pre-meds, called The Disappearing Spoon. And it's really kind of the sordid history of science and discovery all through the history of science. It's pretty fascinating.
Cool.
At least I thought it was. People might read it and think
I'm pretty boring. Yeah.
And I'm reading right now something called a book called The Myth of the Achievement Test by Nobel laureate James Heckman, which is pretty intriguing, especially since we work in the world of that uses achievement tests so dramatically. So those are kind of the things that I have enjoyed reading. I don't know if other people will enjoy reading them or not, but.
Well, I'll put links to these on our show site so people can go and look at these a little bit more in depth if they want to pick it up and check them out. Joel, it's been great having you on the show and getting to have the opportunity to have an expert from Texas walk us through the TMD SAS process, and especially to hear about all the amazing, innovative things happening at Dell Med and the way that you're approaching this the way to train medical students at a new institution. I think I've been sitting here kind of on the edge of my seat, really, and looking at your website. It's really cool and really, really exciting. So thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, that's some awesome stuff right there. Can you tell I'm a fan of Dell Med? What a great school. Hey, and I learned a lot about TMD SAS too. That's a whole new thing for me. Hey, I hope you enjoyed it today. Make sure to check out our show site, where I'll have links to the recommendations that my guests give me on books and podcasts and things they want to share with you to check out. So that website is case.edu/medicine/episodes. So go there for archived episodes, and again, to get those resources. Hey, coming up in another week or so, I'm going to have another episode pushed out to you where I'm doing an interview with the Director of Admissions at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. We talk about the theme of listener questions that week is about reapplying to medical school and some things to keep in mind. So Kathy and I have a great conversation. I'm working on producing that right now. I'll probably get it out here in about another week and a half or so. So hang in there with me. But so keep your eyes out for that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have questions, send them to me at allaccess@case.edu, and hopefully one day we'll get your question on an episode. So hey, thanks again, everybody. See you next time.